Again, thank you for joining us. My name is Mara Walsh, and I'm your host today. We have a really large group online today, and I'm happy to see that all of you are joining us. Thank you. I see a lot of people on this virtual tour that I know, and a ton of you that are new to me. So thank you for joining us. And some that I've even traveled with on physical tours in the past. First, a couple housekeeping items. Your audio. If you need to turn up your audio, you can do this one of three ways. You can attach a headset or earbuds. This is best to hear if you are struggling with audio. You can turn up your computer audio, your volume on your computer. Or you can go to the little arrow next to your mute or microphone icon on the Zoom menu and go to audio settings and turn up the output volume for your speakers. That should handle your audio for you. The screen, you can enlarge the screen by moving the vertical toolbar so that you minimize me or the speaker and you see the slides in a larger format. Okay, now we should be optimized from a technological standpoint, and we're going to get going with our program. I'll share a little bit about myself before we get going. Again, my name is Mara Walsh. I'm in the USA, specifically between Philadelphia and New York, and I started leading physical tours with EF Tours as a Girl Scout leader, taking girls and their families to international destinations every summer. I've since expanded my travel program and added adult-only tours as well as family-friendly tours. In nearly all of my tours, I partner with EF Tours or their adult division Go Ahead Tours. There are a couple reasons I started this virtual tour series. One, I really wanted to support the tour director community during this time of no work. Since we're not traveling, they're obviously not working. Most of the tour directors that we group leaders work with have not been able to earn any money since before March of this year. And it looks like, unfortunately, that's going to continue for the next several months to come. The other reason is I really wanted to keep the excitement of travel alive for my travel group and extend that opportunity to all of you out here who have learned about this through family, friends, social media, and other means. We've done several tours in the past weeks, including Rome, Edinburgh, Paris, London, Peru, Ireland, Greece, Ecuador, Prague, Egypt, and last week we did a literary tour of the UK. I know many of you have joined us, but if you've missed any of them, please know that you can get to the recordings and they're available on my website, girltraveltours.com, with a / of virtual-tours will get you directly there. I will share that link in the chat so that you have it for the future. We have several more tours that we are preparing right now for the future. They include Madrid's Prado Museum, China, the Amalfi Coast, New Zealand, an African safari, an Oktoberfest in Germany, Alaska, and more even after that will follow through. If you're interested in the virtual tours, we will keep putting them on. You can register for future tours and view all of the recordings of the past tours on my website, girltraveltours.com. But today, we're off to discover St. Petersburg and Moscow, exploring Russia. Before we get going, I want to share with you a few ways that you can interact with us during this event. One, you could feel free to ask questions about the tour director, or my travel program in the Q&A. Please know that the Q&A button, those things that you write in the questions, they will be addressed at the end of this tour as part of the Q&A session. If you want to speak with me directly or you just have something to say that you don't want shared in that portion, there's a chat feature and we ask you to use that for those reasons. I always like to include an interactive poll as a way to get familiar with you all and for us to understand how connected you are to the region. So I'm going to launch that poll right now. Essentially this poll is very easy. It's what is your connection to Russia? If you don't see the poll, you can just click on the polling icon on your menu and that should pop it up for you. Right now I'm looking at the results coming in and it looks like almost half plan to go to Russia in the future, we have a huge amount of people that are solely interested in experiencing it virtually. So that's all right with us. Welcome. There's at least about 20% of people who have already been to Russia and love it. That's great. I'm going to end the poll right now. I'm going to share the results so you all can see what the responses were. So you see that? That's pretty interesting, I'm sure, for Dominic as he starts his presentation in a little bit. Okay, so we're going to move on. Regardless of how connected you are to Russia at this point, I know that the presentation will enhance that for you on today's virtual tour. And as you all know, a tour wouldn't be complete without a fantastic tour director. A tour director is like a personal travel concierge who stays with a group from start to finish, shares his wealth of knowledge, and manages all of the tour plans and the details to make it as stressless and positive as an experience for the travels as possible. These tour directors are by far the most important people in our group. And as I said before, if we're not traveling, they're not traveling. So I hope that I'll share with you in the chat a way for us to tip the tour director today. And please know that 100% of those tips go directly to the tour director once they're collected. I'm hoping that this virtual tour will not only reignite our desire to travel, but allow a tour director to do what he does best, which is share his knowledge and passion while earning some tips. We're lucky today to have one of Europe's finest tour directors who happens to be an expert in this region and was excited to come and share his passion for Russia with all of us. I'm honored to introduce you to, and I will be handing over this event to our amazing tour director, Dominic Harris. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Dominic is going to come on. Hello, Dominic. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. I'm just trying to get my screen working.
Awesome. So yeah. I'm going to pop off and you're going to take it from here.
Excellent. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mara. Thanks for organizing this. This is one of the busiest times of the year. And so it's wonderful to still have the opportunity to kind of visit a place, even though it's virtual. Big thank you. My sister helped me with the slides. All she said was, if it's going wrong, just show them slides of kittens. It always works, so I don't know about that. I've assembled a talk on the parts of Russia we're going to be exploring. It's two really major world-class cities, St. Petersburg and Moscow. I'll introduce myself. I'm in Edinburgh at the moment, talk a little about my connection to Russia. I will then go through the geography of Russia, the largest country in the world. I will do a whistle-stop tour of the history as well. I can't possibly cover everything in such a short period of time. I'm then going to talk about three Russian leaders who led within living memory, and that would be ending with Putin, of course, who's now, I think he's 68 years old. I'm going to do an interesting section on what we associate with Russia. I live in Scotland. Presumably you associate kilts and whiskey and golf with Scotland. So what do we think of when we think of Russia? I will then focus on St. Petersburg, describe what we're going to do together, or just ideas for you to do. We're going to have a river cruise of the River Neva, which is a branch of the Volga River, which runs through Moscow, and it ends up coming out into the sea on the Gulf of Finland. So it's a very, very important river. We're going to talk about the whole idea of St. Petersburg and how Peter the Great really built it out of nothing in the marshlands around the Gulf of Finland. Incredible. We are going to pass Peter's summer house. I'll talk a little about what we'll do maybe the day afterwards in St. Petersburg. Sometimes it's nice to go out of the city, do a bit of exploring. A lot of people would go to the northwest to visit the Peterhof. I'll be showing you some lovely slides of that, and Catherine's Palace, with, of course, the fantastic Amber Room, which is world famous. Some people would like to visit the Hermitage. The Hermitage was one of the world's greatest museums when Catherine the Great started collecting art from all over the world. And I think last year, 5 million people visited the Hermitage, just to give you an idea of, you'll have heard of the Hermitage, I imagine. It's a bit like the Louvre is to Paris. We'll also have the opportunity to go to the ballet. Ballet is synonymous with Russia. You have Rudolf Nureyev, you've got the Bolshoi Ballet. St. Petersburg has a wonderful selection of theatres which specialise in ballet. You would probably look to see Swan Lake, that's a Tchaikovsky ballet at this time of year. Getting towards Christmas, you're going to look at something like the Nutcracker, which is wasn't always popular, but it's certainly very popular now. We're then going to take a train. We're going to arrive in Moscow about 4 hours later. So we'll probably set off about lunchtime on our last day in St. Petersburg. Maybe I'll encourage you to see something in the morning. There's lots to see. We'll arrive in Moscow with time to check into the hotel. I'll send Andrei, our driver, ahead. So he's there with our luggage to meet us. In fact, I'll make sure all your bags are ready and waiting in your rooms. How about that? One of the best things to do in Moscow, you may have heard of this, you may have been there, is to explore the underground system. That is spectacular. There are over 200 stations, and we'll be seeing some of the wonderful underground palaces, as they call them, on our first evening together. We end up, very exciting, on Red Square at night. Very, very iconic, exciting sight. The next day, maybe again, there's a couple of options for exploring the surrounding area. Sergiyev Possad is a bit like the Vatican is to Italy. So Sergiyev Possad is to Russia. Very important religious site. Again, it's not just the destination, it's the journey as well. So I'll be talking about some of the things we'll see on that journey. And it's important that we spend a good part of the day exploring the Kremlin and maybe the Armoury, which is the oldest museum in Russia, after doing so. But the Kremlin, we've all heard of the Kremlin. It means fortress, and we definitely need to spend some time on the Kremlin. There are all sorts of other things like our Rabat Street, which is a bit like the Montmartre of Paris. Lots of artists, great place for shopping, eating, etc. Then at the end of a busy week touring Russia as much as we can, I shall be discussing food, because it's about time we had some decent Russian food at the end of all of this. I will follow it up with a short and humble conclusion. It's just my take on it. I'm aware that you can take whatever you want to from this virtual tour, and your perspective is just as important. I just have some things that maybe I've learned over the years. I've been working in Russia for 8 years now. I go in the summer and the winter. I was there on my last tour, actually, which was just before Christmas. So it was interesting to experience Russia just before Christmas. I think over 3/4 of Russians identify as being Russian Orthodox. So surprisingly, for a country that was ruled by communism for so many years, we still have a very, very strong Christian element to Russia. You can see on the map here, let's get started. On the map, you can see St. Petersburg and Moscow. I have ringed them. So we'll be exploring those, and you can see where those two cities are, very much towards the west of Russia. My connection with Russia, well, I work there. I did Russian O-level at school. You do that from about 16 to 18. It was quite an unusual choice, I think, in York, which was a city of about 200,000 people. There were 4 of us who did Russian, so it was an unusual choice. I did 19th century Russian history. I grew up in the northeast of England under the Cold War. So it was a very it was kind of a conversation you had. What would you do if the 3-minute warning happened? My dad, who's a pastor, said he'd go onto the roof and shout "Hallelujah." I don't know if that's true. I studied at Oxford, and instead of going to London like everyone else, after I graduated, I went east to Berlin, and I lived in Berlin. I arrived a year before the collapse of the wall, so I got firsthand to really experience the kind of craziness and the chaos that ensued once that huge series of countries, the Soviet Union, began to crumble. Very, very, very interesting time. I was there when Checkpoint Charlie opened. I was there when the Brandenburg Gate opened. I remember people bouncing these East German Trabant cars up and down and waving West German flags. So it was an incredible time to be there. Right, on with the show. I want to first talk about the geography of this amazing country. The first slide we can see references. There are 11 different time zones in Russia. UTC stands for Coordinated Universal Time. It's the same as Greenwich Mean Time in London. So London is 0. So you can see we really go from you can see this tiny pocket off to, sorry, I jumped slides there, Kaliningrad. It's sandwiched between Poland and Lithuania. It's a green splash of color on the left-hand side. It's the only Russian Baltic seaport, so very important to the Russians. About 1 million people live there. It's the world's largest producer of amber, or the world's largest deposits of amber there. You can see that the Moscow time zone is next. That is 3 hours ahead of UTC. St. Petersburg is in the same time zone. You then have Yekaterinburg, and that's roughly where the Ural Mountains are. They're very important because everything to the east of the Ural Mountains is quite thinly populated. I'll talk about the population of Russia in a minute, but the population dwindles somewhat. There's a lot of people live around the shores of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and also as near as possible to Western Europe. And if you look over to the northeast, you see Kamchatka. Kamchatka time, 12 hours ahead of UTC. Kamchatka has a population of about 300,000. It's called the land of ice and fire because of all its volcanoes and the fact that the climate is the weather's atrocious. It's subarctic, polar in places, it rains a lot. The winters last forever in Kamchatka. But anyway, I wanted to give you an idea of how large the country is. And this is a fun map. It kind of shows the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, which are 2 natural gas lines that come from Russia to Western Europe via Germany. So you can imagine foreign policy is a lot more complex with these kind of energy lines as well. Here's an energy line. I just thought it was a really neat map of Europe to see, to give you an idea of how complex that is. If you're getting your energy needs from Russia, well, are you vulnerable? Russia is named after the bear. The bear is Russia's associated animal. You can see why it's a massive, powerful creature, a little like Russia. The US fits into Russia twice, just to give, I know not all of you live in the US, but just to give you a frame of reference. Russia is about 6,600 square miles, by far the largest country in the world. The US, to put that in perspective, is about 4,700 square miles. Population density. In Russia, you have 142 million. Here it says population. So the distribution is a lot less. It's about 23 people per square mile. As I said, concentrated in the southwest. In the States, I believe it's about 93 per square mile, just to put that into perspective. Life expectancy for a Russian man is 65 years old. So it's definitely below the European average. and for a woman, it's 76 years old. There are all sorts of reasons for this. If you are coming to Russia, many of you would like to attempt a bit of Russian. So here is the Russian Cyrillic alphabet. There are 33 letters in the alphabet. A few compound sounds like j, sh, very interesting. 33 letters as opposed to 26. Here are some of the Russian words you might use if you're going to try anything out. Zdravstvuyte, hello. Spasiba, thank you. Izvinite, sorry. Меня зовут, my name is. Как вас зовут, what is your name? So Меня зовут Dominic, my name is Dominic. Greetings, very important, of course. Dobre utro, dobre dien, and dobre večer. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Important as well, pожалуйста, please, or you're welcome. If a waiter puts your plate down, he might say pожалуйста, a bit like bitteschön or prego in Italian. And до свидания, that is goodbye in Russian. So I hope that you can get all these. There's some very good Russian language learning sites on YouTube. So definitely you could practice a bit before you come to Russia. And everyone's going to know what that means on the left, even if you don't speak Russian. Danger of death. You don't need to speak Russian to understand that, but it does help. And you look to the right here, that's actually a stop sign, but in Russian, in Cyrillic. So the N is actually a P. It can be anglicized as well, but you know, you've got to react quickly to signs like this. So it's worth having a little Russian maybe, or just familiarizing yourself with some of the signs. This is the letter for R. It's also the ruble. That's the sign for the ruble, which is the Russian currency. You can see the R with a horizontal stripe beneath it. We are going to be changing our dollars into rubles to be able to spend money in Russia. And here you have the currency. You can see there's a 50 ruble note in front of us. You can see the 1 ruble coins, and then the kopecks are the bronze coins in tens just behind. A US dollar is about 75 Russian rubles. To give you an idea of what you'll be spending there, to get the metro in St. Petersburg, you'd spend about 55 rubles. So just less than $1. In Moscow, you'd spend about 32 rubles, to give you an idea maybe of daily costs. If you are looking to get a cab to travel around, they are cheap. We don't really use Uber in Russia. We use something called Yandex. This is the kind of thing which I'll brief you about when you get there, or if you get there. I will go through all of this with you. Okay. Now I'm just going to flash through 1500 years of history. I think probably start with 862. That's what the Russians suggest as their founding date, 862 AD. That was the year that the Slav tribes united with the northern Viking tribes under a Viking chieftain. They invited him to bring order and military security to the area just to the north of Moscow. The prince was called Rurik. They made Novgorod their capital, and they took Kiev, which is now in Ukraine, of course, and that's why it was called Kievan Rus. They adopted the Cyrillic language through Vladimir the Great's conversion. He was very inspired by Byzantium, which had its power base around Constantinople, around the Black Sea. And that's where we get the departure in language to Cyrillic, and not one of the Romance languages, not influenced by Roman, of course. And they were invaded by the Mongols. You may have heard of Genghis Khan. The Russians called them the Tatars. They converted to Islam. Their most famous leader established the Golden Horde, which you may have heard of. Golden Horde Empire really lasted in the area in Western modern day Russia until about the end of the 15th century, 1480 to be precise. The first Tsar of Russia was Ivan the Terrible. He would have been sent on an anger management course today with a name like Ivan the Terrible. In 1613, we have Mikhail Romanov, and I mention him because the Parliament of the Zemsky Sobor of the time really invited him to rule, to bring again stability to the area. You can see a young Mikhail being crowned. He really started 300 years of Romanov rule, and it wasn't finished until the Russian Revolution in 1917 and the subsequent murder of the entire royal family in Ekaterinburg in 1918. That 300 years of rule was ushered in. The next leader I'm going to show is Peter I, Peter the Great. Called the Great with good reason. He's interesting to us because of St. Petersburg, of course. He found St. Petersburg on a series of swamps and marshes just off the Gulf of Finland and converted it into a Western-looking, Western-inspired maritime city. St. Petersburg is, with justice, called the Venice of the North. And it was here that Peter had a fleet that could access the Baltic. So very important. After Peter, we had the four empresses, Catherine the Great, Anne, Elizabeth, who constructed the Winter Palace, or had the Winter Palace built. And then, of course, we had the second Catherine. Catherine the Great was in correspondence with Voltaire. She was very enlightened, and it was she who created the Hermitage, which is one of the most loved museums in the world. I would then probably jump to the Crimean War, 1853. You can see at the bottom right of the map, the Crimean Khanate, 1853. They tried to secure another warm water port for various reasons, trade and foreign policy, from the Ottoman Empire, known as the sick man of Europe. You can see the Ottoman Empire down below. They really won very quickly, to the surprise of Britain and France, who promptly laid siege to St. Petersburg and took Sevastopol after a bitter siege which lasted a year. It was a bit like the Cold War in the 19th century. It was called the Great Game. And everywhere you went in Central Europe, and particularly around the Balkans, Russia and Britain were constantly at loggerheads. So it was a bit like the Cold War and Russia against the other superpower, the US. So very interesting time. I'm going to talk about, in 1861, the next slide shows the abolition of slavery. It's the abolition of serfdom, but serfdom was really tantamount to slavery. 80% of people who lived in the countryside were serfs, and that meant that they were born into a life of slavery, really. So 1861, you have the emancipation of the serfs. It was such an important moment. I'm going to put a cartoon, which I quite liked, in there. These are the serfs being emancipated. At one fell swoop, 23 million people found freedom. So just an incredible moment, really. Shortly afterwards, in 1867, so 6 years after the abolition of serfdom, Russia decided to sell Alaska to the States. And you can see the geography of it. I think it was about $7 million. And this was sold to them before they realized that there were massive reserves of gold and oil in Alaska. The next event is based around, this is the Church of the Saviour on Blood in St. Petersburg, a wonderful looking place. The other building I would encourage you to visit is St. Isaac's. Peter the Great was born on St. Isaac's Saint's Day, so very important to the identity of St. Petersburg. Alexander II was assassinated at this very point. An anarchist threw a bomb into his carriage. It exploded, failed to kill him. He staggered out of the carriage, relatively unharmed, and was killed with another bomb, having declared, praised God for divine providence. So very unfortunate. This is wonderful church commemorating the assassination of Alexander II. A few years later, 1905, you may have heard of Bloody Sunday, connected with the troubles in Ireland. Here too, there was a Bloody Sunday in 1905 when government troops fired on protesters, maybe a sign of things to come in the impending revolution. The Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated by a Serbian nationalist. You can see this on the front page of a newspaper in Europe at the time. That started the First World War. And Russia joined out of an alliance with Serbia in support of Balkan Serbia. Their participation was costly. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of turmoil in Russia during that time as well. I think a combination of war weariness, severe casualties, and incompetent government really precipitated the revolution of 1917, and the Bolsheviks took power, led by Lenin. And we're going to see Lenin speaking without a microphone in St. Petersburg. I mean, just incredible. He must have had an amazing voice. We're going to now see him speaking at the Smolny Institute, which is in St. Petersburg. Smolny refers to tar. It's a Russian word for tar, and it was where the ships were tarred and prepared to join the Russian Navy. I took this photo in December. We drove there. It's slightly to the north of the centre of St. Petersburg, and that's a church, but either side of the finishing schools, founded by Catherine the Great and taken over by the Bolsheviks when they were based here. So it was here that Lenin declared that the Bolshevik Revolution had been successful. So an incredible moment, really. The communism, of course, dominated Russia throughout the 20th century. It's not something that Putin talks about much anymore. It's kind of, they prefer to talk about the war with Sweden. They prefer to talk about the Battle of Borodino. I'll be talking about that in a second, and the Great Patriotic War against the Germans. But it's important. We will discuss it. But it's not really dealt with comfortably at the moment, since they've switched to capitalism. So here, created by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Of course, Stalin, he appears on the scene in 1922 and rules Russia. We have heard of the Great Purge. People lived in a certain amount of fear. He really, filled up the gulags in Siberia with his rule, 1922 to 1952. Then you had Khrushchev. I know we've jumped slightly to Brezhnev, Leonid Brezhnev, 1964 to 1982. This is an interesting slide. It's really, communism has ended. It's 1998. There was a huge economic crash in 98. The price of oil just bottomed out, and a Russian ruble, 6 Russian rubles to the dollar. Before the crisis, within 3 months, it was 21 Russian rubles to the dollar. So here's a line of people anxiously waiting to convert their rubles into dollars before things get any worse. I'm just going to briefly mention current historical identity at the moment. So this is what you'd be taught as a Russian. This is part of your identity. Poltava, 1709. It was a battle with Charles XII from Sweden. Basically, Russia is a nation at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. So it's always drawn the attention of any rising imperialist power of the age. So here it was Sweden, and they beat them at Poltava in 1709, and the Swedes retreated. The next major conflict would be against Napoleon. You can see the Battle of Borodino. There's a quite a remarkable 360 panoramic museum in Moscow of the Battle of Borodino. Very imaginative, well done. It's a big part again of how the Russians see themselves. And they beat, there was no clear victor at the Battle of Borodino, but they did weaken the French and they kept retreating. In fact, Napoleon really was trying to get Alexander I to come to the negotiating table. He refused to. They kept retreating. They even burnt Moscow. So when Napoleon finally arrived in Moscow, he found there was no food. There was no really comfortable winter quarters for his troops, who were ill prepared to survive the Russian winter. By the time they returned to France in December 1812, they had lost 500,000 men, which is just an extraordinary casualty rate. And finally, you have Barbarossa. Famously, Hitler and Stalin agreed to carve Poland up in 1939, which really started the Second World War. And Hitler was just biding his time for a massive assault on Russia. That will be quite, well, it definitely shaped the way Russians see their history. It really shaped Leningrad. You may have heard of the siege of Leningrad. It lasted 872 days. 500,000 Leningraders lost their lives during that almost 3 years of siege. It was only because Lake Ladoga to the north froze that they were able to get supplies in. But it was one does think about that when you think of Leningrad. Just an incredible part of their history, really. Leningrad was, of course, the new name for St. Petersburg under the communists. Okay, we're going to move on to 3 Russian leaders within living memory. Gorbachev, he's given the Nobel Prize for Peace. He negotiates an arms reduction with the states. He doesn't oppose the flood of people leaving the embassy in Prague. He doesn't oppose the Berlin Wall opening at various points. He doesn't really have an impact on people's daily lives economically. So a year after getting the Nobel Prize, he's kind of ousted in a coup. But you'd be very familiar with the figure of Gorbachev, associated with perestroika and glasnost. The next person I want you to see is Yeltsin. He served as the first president of Russia from 1991 to 99. And transformed Russia from a top-down, heavily government-organized economy into a market economy. It's amazing. He liked to drink, famously, and he was always attending events and dancing or waving flags or kind of celebrating with shots of vodka. Very, very loved, always seen as a bit of a firebrand. He was the only person who dared resign from the Politburo under Gorbachev for allowing 2 minor demonstrations to happen in Moscow. You can't see there, but on his left hand, he only has 3 fingers because 2 were blown off by a grenade he was playing with in his village in the aftermath of the Second World War. But Yeltsin, Boris Yeltsin, he famously came to visit Bill Clinton in 1994 and stayed in Blair House, which is where foreign dignitaries normally stay near the White House, and was found in his underpants buying a pizza by the security guards. I think he was found several days later wandering around in his underwear. I mean, I don't want you to think about that, but there he is, Boris Yeltsin, fantastic, having a boogie. Of course, the next leader is very important. It is Putin. He is now, Putin is 68 years old, and you can see there's a picture of him on horseback when he was on holiday in southern Siberia. He was about 11 years younger. On the right, this is a picture of him playing hockey last year. He scored 8 goals, and on his victory lap with the rest of the team, he fell over. So his image as a strong man was slightly dented by him falling falling over. He was in the KGB for 17 years. So from 1975, he worked for the KGB. John McCain, the US Senator, famously said when he met Putin, he looked into his eyes and he saw three things: a K, a G, and a B. Okay. Another thing I want to mention is, okay, we're going to talk about things that we associate with Russia, and I have to mention soccer. Russia got the World Men's Soccer Championship 2 years ago in the summer of 2018. So here you have a young man dressed in the Russian football team heading a ball. Here are some of the stadiums that Russia organized the cup with. There's nothing like an international sporting event to bolster a sense of national identity. How do you feel when you're watching the team? How well are Russia doing? Patriotic. The most famous teams are from Moscow: CSKA Moscow, also Dynamo Moscow, Lokomotiv Moscow, sorry. Zenit St. Petersburg are the current champions. So those three teams are probably the most famous and the ones who take part in the Champions League most. You might associate Russia with vodka. It's at least 40% proof. It's made from wheat or rye. Smirnoff is the number one vodka the number one selling spirit in the world. I hope you enjoy the slide. I think you might think of space travel when you consider Russia. Here's Laika, not looking terrified as she was. Laika was plucked off the streets of Moscow and chosen ahead of a pack of other dogs to be sent up into space. Laika, I think, survived her first orbit of the world. It took about 100 minutes, but definitely did not survive the other 2,570 orbits. But there's Laika. Belka and Strelka on the right successfully did get sent up into space and returned. In fact, in 1960, Khrushchev gave a puppy that Strelka had produced to John F. Kennedy as a present. If you want to be an astronaut or a cosmonaut, as we say in Russia, you need to pass this test. This is called a Rorschach's test. And basically, the key is you are not meant to see anything in it. When you answer this question, what do you see? You say an ink blot. If you see anything weird, marvelous, or if you're creative, it's probably a bad sign and you will not be chosen as an astronaut. One person who was chosen as a cosmonaut was Yuri Gagarin. He was short, so he could fit into the Russian cockpit of Vostok 1. Vostok 1 roughly translates as east. And he was hyper observant. They said he was very aware of his surroundings. So he was the first human being to orbit the world. So very, very important. And we'll be hearing more about Yuri Gagarin later. His daughter actually runs the Armoury in the Kremlin, amazingly enough. And here we have, these are typical of Russia's long-standing interest in space travel and all things to do with outer space. You can see a Christmas tree even is adorned with rockets. You can see this is Gum, one of the famous shopping malls, or perhaps the most famous in Moscow. And you can see Paul Smith, you can see Chanel. This was taken also at Christmas time. You might associate Russia with the Walrus Club. This is a young man jumping into freezing cold water in Gorky Park on January the 19th, which is Epiphany, and there's a kind of spiritual cleansing as well as it being good for your health. But it's a very traditional thing to do in Russia at Epiphany. Also, you might think about Astrakhan. Astrakhan hats. Here's a gentleman wearing an Astrakhan hat. Astrakhan is on the northern shores of the Caspian Sea. It's very famous for its wool. Apparently, the wool is taken from lambs who are just 3 days old. Not much of a life. But that is Astrakhan. He's proudly sporting a very warm, nice Astrakhan hat. The next couple of slides I'm going to show you are really to do with Winston Churchill's comment that Russia is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. He said that in 1939 when trying to work out how to do business with Stalin. And I'm just going to talk about things wrapped inside things. Perhaps the most obvious are Russian dolls. So here you see the Russian doll, and that is associated with fertility, as it has traditionally, in the very inside, there's a baby. There's the baby doll on the right-hand side, associated with family and fertility. Of course, if you're talking about miniatures, you would want to mention Fabergé eggs. There's a fantastic museum in St. Petersburg, and also in the Armoury, they have the largest collection of imperial eggs. And these are two, as you can see, Alexei on the left, and you can see Nicholas II's royal family on the right-hand side. The next slide we are going to see is perhaps in reference to the great train ride that everyone knows about, the Trans-Siberian Railway. That covers 6,000 miles from Moscow to Vladivostok, and it takes a week if you ever want to do that. Our journey will just be 4 hours. Now, I've done a map here showing St. Petersburg to Moscow. We will be taking that on our final day in St. Petersburg, where we'll be reunited with our luggage in the evening, but it takes about 4 hours. We travel at about 150 miles an hour. I've also put Suzdal on that. Sometimes we go off to Suzdal. It's a lovely, medium-sized, but very rustic, beautiful town that you might choose to do a day trip out to. We won't be doing it on this tour, but it is it's definitely worth doing at some point. I'm going to suggest Sergiyev Possad, but let's do St. Petersburg first. St. Petersburg, Moscow, both of them capital cities at some point. Moscow originally, St. Petersburg from 1712 under Peter the Great, and Moscow again after the successful Russian Revolution of 1918. Lenin moved the capital to Moscow because it was considered to be safer away from the First World War. St. Petersburg is more Western, more kind of outward looking. Moscow is a little more insular, maybe a little more spiritually Russian, but both of them fantastic places. The population of St. Petersburg is about 5.5 million, and of Moscow, it's a lot larger. You might experience that if you drive out into the surrounding countryside. About 12.5 million. So both of them absolutely massive cities. When you arrive, we'll have a bit of time to go for a walk, to go exploring. You might want to walk down the Nevsky Prospect in St. Petersburg. Really amazing. These Art Deco buildings from the 1920s and 30s. The Singer building on the right, that was temporarily the American Embassy during the First World War, also called the House of Books. There's all sorts of other sites down the Nevsky Prospect, St. Isaac's, the Anchikov Bridge, just really, really worth taking a stroll down the Nevsky Prospect, named after Andrew Nevsky, actually, a very famous monk. Okay, here we have, if you're going to walk, especially just if you're into music, virtually every street corner you can hear there's bands with drum kits and people jumping around and generally having a good time. I think I saw a statue of Freddie Mercury from Queen outside the Rock Cafe around the corner from here. St. Petersburg is quite famous for music. I went to a festival last summer actually down by the docks. Fantastic, lots of Russian bands playing. Well, we're going to assemble the gang for the first time properly to do the Venice of the North cruise. It's the best angle to see St. Petersburg from. This is the Neva River, and it's a fantastic way to enjoy your first encounter with some of the historic landmarks of St. Petersburg. As I say, it's an extension of the Volga River. So we're going to start, here's a map of the cruise we're going to do. You can see number 1 here. We're going to start just at number 1, and that's really near the Bronze Horseman. It's also near the Hermitage and the Admiralty. So I'm going to talk about some of the buildings we'll see on that cruise, and you can go into later, or we have guides if you want to take advantage of the guides to do that. Number 1, you see the Bronze Horseman just to the bottom of number 1. The Bronze Horseman was a title given to the statue of Peter the Great in 1833. Beautiful poem by Pushkin. If you're studying literature, Russian literature in school, you're going to do the Bronze Horseman. It's a very, very beautiful poem, and it's a statue of Peter the Great. He's crushing a serpent. The serpent is representing evil or the enemies of Peter as he tries to create this new world for Russia in St. Petersburg. But a very, very powerful stone. It's about 45 feet high, and Catherine has that built to claim continuity with Peter the Great. I think she was very aware that she had her husband assassinated and wasn't really an elected ruler. So she was claiming kinship with Peter the Great. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the Winter Palace. Here's the Bronze Horseman, fantastic site. The Winter Palace, this is now the Hermitage. You can see there's some horse-drawn carriages. These are for visitors to drive around. Looking surprisingly empty, it must be closed. Normally there's a huge line of people to get in. One of the world's truly great museums. You can see the Russian flag flying above it. A beautiful aesthetic as well. So many of the palaces in St. Petersburg have these very striking colours. And if you go when it's been snowing, it looks wonderful because the colours are reflected in the snow. So very, very interesting. So this is the Hermitage, the Winter Palace. You can see inside the Hermitage things that you would be looking forward to seeing. Maybe the peacock clock, some of the wonderful art. Everyone's there. Goya, El Greco, Da Vinci, Kandinsky, Picasso. It's an incredible collection. You may want to see the peacock clock. James Cox, famous goldsmith from London, had that made for the Tsar. It's incredible. The peacock fans its tail, the cockerel crows. Every Wednesday, they actually have, they wind up the clock and it's exhibited in full working order. Caravaggio on the right, just to give you an example of the brilliance of the collection. Caravaggio's lute player, he was a very, very famous Italian painter from around the early 17th century, so the 1600s. But you know, this is an example of the kind of art that you would see in the Hermitage. The next stop we're going to take on our barge for photos is Peter and Paul Fortress. Peter and Paul Fortress is one of the first military installations built by Peter. You can see its huge tower. Inside that church are buried the Romanovs traditionally. All the Romanovs are buried there. It has the Mint. It was a prison for political prisoners for many years as well. In fact, Maxim Gorky was imprisoned there, the famous writer. He gave his name to Gorky Park, of course, which was a very famous film featuring Jack Osborne, the CIA agent, not to be messed with. But the Peter and Paul Fortress is definitely worth a stop later. We're going to sail past it just now. The next thing we're going to do, here's the tombs actually of the Romanovs. The statue on the left is of Peter the Great, a very odd statue. I knew he was tall. I didn't realize he had a tiny head. So quite an odd statue. I think you might agree with that. We're going to see the beautiful Peter's Summer Palace's gardens as we sail sail past them. Just wonderful. And I'm going to talk a little on the basis of this garden. I'm going to talk a little maybe about striking out of St. Petersburg into the countryside, up into the Gulf of Finland tomorrow at some point. People would traditionally go there, if you think this is beautiful, to see the Peterhof. Look at that, absolutely beautiful. They say it's more splendid than Versailles. I'm inclined to agree. It's a great thing to do. It's about a 50-minute journey from St. Petersburg. You would wander around the gardens, look at the water shooting up from the tulips. The tree also spouts water, and it's a kind of joke that Peter played on his guests. Every so often, it's a mechanical set up. So every so often water basically soaked the guests in all their finery. And they'd often be late for dinner, and Peter would mockingly tell them off, upbraid them for not being more punctual. So that's fun to enjoy. You might want to go to Catherine's Palace, which is stunning. And this is the very famous Amber Room. Amber, it's really lovely to walk around and part of a lovely afternoon if you would like to do that. Not only are those important destinations, but what you see on the way. So here you drive past the Gazprom Tower, and it's called the Lacta Center. It's the largest tower in Europe. It's about 1,500 feet tall. So just to give you an idea of the aspirational world that you're exploring, the Lacta Center, 1,500 feet tall, Gazprom, the great Russian energy giants. And that you'd also see the new football stadium, Zenit St. Petersburg, on your travels, and you'd see St. Petersburg in the distance. So interesting. Anyway, I digressed. So we've just sailed past Peter's summer residence. Now, this is the Aurora. The Aurora survived the Russian-Japanese War. It was built in 1900 as a cruiser. And on the evening of the 25th of October 2017, the forecastle gun signaled the start of the assault on the Winter Palace. So very famous. It's always been a museum treasured under the communists as well as part of their communist history, the Russian Revolution, the shots fired. They fired on the Winter Palace as well, but didn't do much damage. It was more kind of symbolic shelling of the palace. You may have heard of the storming of the Winter Palace. It wasn't so much a storming in 1917. The storming of the Winter Palace refers to a theatrical recreation of 1920. But nevertheless, a seminal moment in the Russian Revolution. We are going to sail past the Yusupov Palace. Here's a picture of the notorious Rasputin. He really came to prominence in 1911, and his influence lasted for 5 years. He was a very spiritual man. He could reportedly tell the future. People were worried about the influence he was having on the Tsarina. You can see Alexei, the young boy in the picture. He was a hemophiliac, and Rasputin was very, very good at looking after him, and therefore gained a lot of influence, maybe through that. You can see a picture of Rasputin here. This is Count Yusupov. The Yusupov Palace that we'll be sailing past on our cruise is where Rasputin was assassinated. Basically, he was invited to the Yusupov Palace to an imaginary party. He was given several drinks laced with cyanide, enough to kill an army, a monastery, let alone a single monk. They failed to kill him. Incredible. Count Yusupov shot him. That failed to kill him. There's a dreadful story of Rasputin chasing him up the staircase. Finally, a group of people chased Rasputin into the courtyard and shot him. He died, and they weighted him down and threw him in the river. But just a legendary story of Rasputin's refusal to die. Towards the end, here's the Yusupov Palace, actually. We may want to visit that on our final morning. It's a museum, and it's perhaps the best preserved of all the palaces in the centre of of St. Petersburg, and that's saying something if you remember the 3-year shelling of the city by the Germans in Barbarossa. We're nearing the end of our journey. You can see 2 lighthouses from 1711. They are basically based on rostrals from the Roman Empire. You can see the ship's masts either side of the columns. You can also see there's allegories of the 4 main Russian rivers at the bottom: the Volga, the Dnieper, the Neva, and the Volkhov. And these really mark the split in the river between the major Neva, the Bolshaya Neva, and the smaller Neva River, the Malaya Neva. Okay, we're nearing the end of our cruise now. This is a list of the various theatres I think you should consider: the Mariinsky, the Alexandrinsky, the Mikhailovsky, and the Hermitage. All of them famous in their order, really, for their productions, fantastic productions of ballet. You may have heard of the Bolshoi Ballet as well in Moscow. That's very much influenced by Russian folklore and traditional dance styles, so very vigorous style of dancing. Rudolf Nureyev began his career in the Mariinsky Theatre in St. Petersburg. He very famously defected from Paris in 1961 when I think his KGB agent told him his mum was ill in Moscow and he had to go back. It sounds to me about as convincing as the excuse that my dog ate my homework. So Rudolf Nureyev decided to hit the eject button. He ended up, I heard Mara talking about a future virtual tour of the Amalfi Coast, which is fantastically beautiful. Rudolf Nureyev actually bought an island off the Amalfi Coast. And he built a dance studio there. You can rent that island now for 12 guests. I think it's $260,000 a week, food included, and you get the use of the boat as well. Divided by 12, is it affordable? That's a lot of money. Anyway, you can see Odette dancing beautifully in Swan Lake. You can see the inside of the Alexandrinsky Theatre. Very, very ornate, very old-fashioned, beautiful theatre. You can see the orchestra in the pit. Here's another big scene from Swan Lake, I think. Yes, Odette is dancing with Siegfried, and the swans are in attendance. I'm going to also play you a short clip from Swan Lake, and I should be quiet whilst it's going. It's absolutely lovely. It's the dance of the young swans, which you will definitely be familiar with. Okay, oh sorry, here's another slide of some dancing, and here is the dance of the young swans. Okay, I did it twice. I was so impressed. I did it. I was so impressed with my technological. No, don't get caught out. If we're going out to the theatre, if you're going out to enjoy St. Petersburg in the evening, do not get caught out by the bridges. They all come up between 1:30 and 4:30, and there are clubs and bars that come alive during these times. Far too late for me, I'm afraid to say. But here are the lever bridges going up between 1:30 and 4:30. So don't get caught in the centre of the island city of St. Petersburg. I'm going to have you give your suitcases in tomorrow on our second day in St. Petersburg. That is because I'm going to send Andrei, our driver, to Moscow with our luggage. So it's there waiting for us when we arrive on our high-speed train. The roads are great, but even the road from St. Petersburg to Moscow has potholes. There can be road works. You never know. So I think it's important that you can expect to be reunited with your luggage on our first evening in Moscow. So Andrei will set off earlier. We will only be having hand luggage for our journey on the high-speed train. It's all very tightly controlled. It's like airport type security. as you may have sadly heard, there have been historic attempts on public transport throughout the years. I'm thinking of Beslan, I'm thinking of the Moscow Theatre, I'm thinking of Chechnya. Throughout the years there have been problems. So there is a kind of airport type X-ray machine. We take hand luggage with us on our wonderful train journey. Before we do the train journey, which sets off about 1 o'clock, you might want to go and visit the Yusupov Palace. And I've got a few slides here to show you the interior. This is what we sailed past yesterday with, remembering that Rasputin was assassinated. It's a very, very beautiful interior. And we have a guided tour of that on our final morning in St. Petersburg. Okay, and this is a Sapsan train. It'll journey at 150 miles an hour. It's very, very efficient. There is a restaurant car with affordable food if you get hungry. And when we get to the station in Moscow, we'll arrive at Leninskaya station. Our coach will pick us up and drive us to the hotel, so it's all organised. You can see what it looks like inside. It's a very, very modern, very comfortable, and it's a great way to travel. The experience of travelling, you look through the windows, it'll be afternoon, you see mile upon mile of forests, punctuated by these beautiful Russian villages and lakes. Many people who live in the metropoli of Moscow and St. Petersburg have dachas. Dachas are country houses where in times of shortage they could grow vegetables and fruit. It's very important to have a dacha, a country house to enjoy with your family in the summer. Okay, so I'm going to give you a map of Moscow. You can see the Volga River wending its way like an undulating snake through Moscow. You can see in the center here the triangle of green. That is the area around the Kremlin, which we'll visit later on. Gum, the department store, just off to the right. So we'll go to the hotel, be reunited with our luggage, and then head out to enjoy the underground. The underground is incredibly busy, 200 stations, 17 different lines. Millions of Muscovites take it every day, so it really is better to do it in the evening when it's a bit quieter. Here we have a map of the Moscow Underground, and I've circled some of the stations we're going to be seeing, so you get an idea. I'll give everyone a copy of this before we set off. You can see the Park Pobedi off to the left, out on the Ramenki line. That's one of the deepest stations in the world. It's over 300 feet below ground. It is a diversion, so I wanted to mark it. Maybe we go there, maybe we find some other stations, but it's interesting. This is Park Pobedi. You see, it's not a traditional station. It's not Russian Baroque. It's not celebrating communism. It's not celebrating the Great Patriotic War. It's a more modern station, but it's very, very far underground. 300 feet, that's a long way. The Moscow Underground was really built throughout the 1930s. Very, very exciting time. The whole city was buzzing. I wasn't around, but the whole city was apparently buzzing. Station designs were displayed in the shop windows along Tverskaya Street. It was really something. The St. Petersburg Metro wasn't really started until the 50s, so that was some 20 years later, but that's beautiful as well. Not really as stunning and famous as Moscow. And here you have your first station, Komsomolskaya. Skaya really means belonging to, so belonging to Komsomolsky. That means it's referring to the street above. And the Komsomol was the Russian youth organization, which helped actually in the building of this station. But how beautiful is that? They're right to call them underground palaces. Just incredible. Transforming the way workers started their day. Palaces were not for the aristocrats, they were for the workers who were the aristocrats of the new Russia. Here you see Mayakovskaya station as well, just beautiful. I took this photo when I was there in December. You see Kievskaya with its beautiful murals, celebrating the rich folk heritage of the Russians. You see Belaruskaya with some of the rebels who fought in the Second World War. Again, a proud part of Russia's history. Pushkinskaya, just beautiful. Very, very interesting. Interesting places. Look at this one. Just stunning. I mean, imagine getting on a train here every morning. Ploshad Revolucji is where we're going to end up, because that's just off Red Square. And I want you to see Red Square at night. So I want you to enjoy gum lit up, the walls of the Kremlin. St. Basil's at night is stunning. But look, you can see the bronze. People touch these animals for luck. So you touch the beak of the cockerel or the snout of the dog as you pass to give you luck. Here's another underground station. I wanted to come out onto Red Square. Okay, here's a kitten. Okay, that shouldn't have been there. Thank you, sister. That's a cute kitten. I hope you enjoy that. This is Red Square at night with gum. How beautiful is that? And it's very exciting to spend your first evening in Moscow on this square. You really get the feeling you're somewhere very special, which you've seen in photos. You've imagined yourself there, and here you are. You see St. Basil's in front. You see the Kremlin on the right. Kremlin is Russian for fortress. And you see gum on the left as well. We will spend time here during the daytime. I would suggest that we go out to Sergiyev Possad, that we spend some of our days in Moscow doing that. It's about an hour's drive. Sergiyev Possad, look at it. It's absolutely stunning with its array of different churches. It's 16th and 17th century military fortifications around it. Amongst the treasures in churches like the Lavra Church are the famous icon painted by Andrei Rublev, beautiful Russian icon of the Holy Trinity. He was painting in the 15th century. We don't know a great deal about him, but here's the icon, which is very famous, perhaps the most famous Russian picture of them all. And here's a stamp dedicated to Andrei Rublev. I'm not sure if he looked like that, but there he is. On a stamp. As I said before, over 70% of Russians identify as Orthodox Christians, which you may not have held to be true, but it is. And that was a survey done, in fact, last year. The next shot will be the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church. It's Cyril, who's he's the head of the church based in Moscow. Celibacy is the norm for bishops, but not for priests, if you want to know the difference between. And they don't hold the Pope to be infallible and the head of the church. Okay, they see themselves as really direct descendants of Christ's church. So very authentic. Now, remember, it's not just about destinations. Sergiyev Possad, fantastic. They also have those wonderful Russian dolls as well, the matryoshkas. But it's about the journey. And the journey I have organized for us to see Anatoly, who has a lovely dacha. I wanted you to see this because we've seen so many on our train journey, or we will do, sorry. This is a dacha on the outskirts of a small town. He's very proud of it. You can see the apple trees are in full blossom. And this is a picture of Anatoly. And he lets us explore his garden and spend time in the countryside, which is something I like. Going off the beaten path. I like something that you get the feeling it's in a kind of it's a bit of a jewel, you know, to be able to do that, to be able to actually engage with a Russian garden and a dacha. So thank you, Anatoly. Here you will also see on the outskirts of Moscow, this is a fantastic monument to Yuri Gagarin. The statue is made of titanium. It's a metal often used in spacecraft, and it's 100 feet high. but it's just an amazing thing to see from the highway. We're about 100 yards away from it, but very, 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 very interesting site, Yuri Gagarin. And it's just off Yuri Gagarin Avenue where he arrived after his successful space flight. Another kitten, oh dear. This is the Kremlin and St. Basil in the daytime. You really need to see it in the daytime. It means we can gain access to the Kremlin as well with its 5 palaces and 4 cathedrals. Putin doesn't spend a great deal of time inside the Kremlin, but the parliament do meet in there. So it's a very important place. It has the Armoury as well, which we'll visit after visiting the Kremlin. The Soviet government moved from what they called Petrograd in the First World War, St. Petersburg, to Moscow in 1918. Vladimir Lenin moved in. Stalin moved in after him. Stalin famously couldn't tolerate the golden eagles. Everywhere the eye could see there was a golden eagle representing the Tsars, representing royalty. So he replaced everything with a red star. You can see on the top of the Kremlin Tower, there's a red star. That's one of the red stars that Stalin had installed. Okay, the Armoury. Here's another picture of the Kremlin to give you an idea of the size of it. Here are some of the churches which we'll visit inside it. This is the Armoury. It's run by Yuri Gagarin's daughter. Okay, and I make no apologies for being excited by that. I think it's great. She does a great job as well. Yelena, Dr. Yelena Yurievna Gagarin runs the museum. It was the first museum in Russia. I think it was established in the start of the 19th century. And you'd look at some of the jewels. Say, look, this is the coronation crown. Apparently, it has 2,500 diamonds in it. I mean, just incredible. Sable fur around one of the imperial crowns. Just really amazing. You can see the sleigh that pulled Elizabeth, the Empress, to her coronation from St. Petersburg to Moscow, all that way that we took on the train along an old, 19th century, early 19th century road. Incredible. It was pulled by 23 horses. And in the Armoury you have the Fabergé eggs as well. A really great selection of these wonderful eggs. You can see Nicholas II on the right-hand side, the ice egg on the left-hand side with the snowdrops. Just beautiful. I would suggest afterwards that we head down Rabat Street. Really, really nice, famous, one of Moscow's oldest streets. You can see the street artists there. There's lots of shops selling souvenirs. I don't know whether you want to shop. You can get anything online, I suppose, but it's fun. And you can get old badges, and you can get whatever you want connected to your visit in Russia. You can get down here. We also have now this is the swimming pool. When Stalin knocked down Church of Christ the Saviour, we have the swimming pool that was constructed quite deliberately, I think, in the place of the cathedral. The present church was incredible. It was built between 1995 and 2000 with, I think, over 1,000 Muscovites contributed to it. It's very, very famous. I think we've been doing a lot of touring. I'm kind of getting hungry. I wonder if we should talk a bit about Russian food. What is this? This is caviar, perhaps the most famous of Russian foods. It's taken from the beluga, the wild sturgeons from either the Caspian or the Black Seas. Very famous and very expensive black Russian caviar. Blinis, they are made from buckwheat, very nice with sour cream and salmon. The blini is much beloved of Russian cooking. Russian salads, that was kind of invented in the States, but a Russian salad is different vegetables. Here you've got a diced ham, but it can be vegetarian as well. You've got peas, potatoes, mayonnaise. beef is more traditional, as is with borscht. Borscht can be with beef or without. This is a beetroot soup with sour cream and dill on top. That's a very traditional, hearty Russian meal. Beef stroganoff. That was apparently made for Count Stroganoff in St. Petersburg, who had terrible teeth and couldn't eat a steak. So the chef chopped the steak up and gave it to him with pasta. I think it was a kind of Russian tagliatelle, but very nice beef stroganoff. Okay, I'm just going to talk a little about what we think of Russia today. And I've jumped to a slide of two people, Sergei and Julia. It's father and daughter, sorry, and that's the Skripals. March 2018, they were poisoned with Novichok. So do we think of poisoning when we think of Russian foreign policy? I mean, just this was in Salisbury, a sleepy little town in England. Many Russian diplomats were expelled as a result of this. I mentioned this. Petrov and Boshirov were the two agents who were filmed in Salisbury that day. I mentioned this because it's in the news at the moment, isn't it? Here's Navalny, who has recently been poisoned, is in a hospital in Germany. He's a very outspoken critic of Putin. Again, it's in the news all over the place at the moment. Apparently, it was Novichok. Novichok disrupts the central nervous system, and you end up muscles seize. You run the risk of cardiac arrest. It's a dreadful poison. Yes, Navalny. He's hopefully recovering at the moment. Okay, just to go back to Churchill's quote, I'm going to sum up briefly. The full quote from Churchill was, "I cannot forecast you the action of Russia. It is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. Perhaps there is a key. That key is Russian national interest." And maybe everything makes a bit more sense when you think about the geography of Russia, when you think about Russian insecurity, how difficult it is to somehow run a country that size, combining so many different areas, spanning Europe and Asia. Here, you see the need for a reliable port from which to trade. You know that Russia, here's a image of Russia during the Cold War, expanded to its maximum. Always this desire to have a buffer, some buffer states between Russia and the NATO countries. Again, changing foreign policy. When you look back on experiences of Russia, I think one's left with a great sense of here's a country making its mark, whether it's St. Petersburg, the aristocracy, building the Hermitage, building the Navy, trying to punch above its weight, an aspirational sense of nationhood. I think that's a good word, ambitious. So whether you're thinking of the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, or you're thinking of one of Stalin's Seven Sisters towers in Moscow. Honestly, Moscow looks like Gotham City. The Seven Sisters towers, these incredible skyscrapers built by Stalin. It's statement architecture. That's what I would concluded. In the world's largest country, amazing that so much has survived of the Russia that we've seen for the past week. Okay, I'm sure you've got your own angles on it. That was my humble take on it. And thank you for listening.
Wow, that's awesome. So thank you so much. I know that we ran over, and I'm sorry, but I think the information is so interesting that we were all very happy with it. So I'm going to take this screen back, if you don't mind, and just share a question and answer slide. So at this time, Dominic, you can go into the Q&A and start reading those questions and get ready. I'm just going to go through a couple things, and then I'm going to hand it back over to you for the questions. As you all know, Dominic is a very knowledgeable tour guide in Russia, and he could probably do this tour without thinking about it in most days if he was physically taking us. But we know that the time he spent to put this together in electronic format and probably learn the technology as well takes a bit of time. So if you are inclined to tip him, there is directions in the chat. Also, I'm giving you some information on the screen. You can take a screenshot or a picture with your phone, whatever works for you. You'll also get a follow-up email with details on how to tip the tour director. But firstly, I just want to thank everybody for coming on. I know this is a lot of your time, but we appreciate you. And as long as you are engaged with these types of virtual tours, we will keep producing them for you. You will get a follow-up email with links to recordings of other tours, as well as a link to the next tour. So if Dominic is ready, he can come back on and we can go through the questions. And you can sort of start at the top, Dominic, and take it from there.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Please discuss security and safety in the area. There is quite a lot of security, especially when you use public transport. I feel safe walking around St. Petersburg, Moscow. Yeah, I'd say it's a safe country. Why is the life expectancy for males in Russia so incredibly low? I'm afraid it has to do a bit with alcohol consumption. They like to drink. You know, I showed a bottle of vodka as a kind of stereotype, but it's true. It's also to do with the lack of immigration. It's to do with the low birth rate as well. I think economic insecurity contributes to that. And I think the life expectancy of women will always be higher. It's just the way it is. What percentage of Russia is habitable? Good question. I don't know the answer. What does the sunglasses represent under the sign? Okay, where was the sign?
That was really early on in the presentation.
Okay.
You may just not remember, and that's
I'm sorry. Okay. Here's a question about a bit of non-contiguous land. Yeah, that's really interesting. That is basically, that is Kaliningrad, a really important enclave, sandwiched between Poland and Lithuania. 1 million people live there, and a very important part of the Baltic fleet is there. Who was responsible for the abolition of slavery? That was in 1861. The Tsar was. It was one of the most popular things that the Tsar did, Alexander I. Slavery, well, it's serfdom, but yes, 23 million serfs. Incredible. How come you didn't mention millions of Russian people who were murdered, starved, shot by Lenin and Stalin? I think that's an excellent point. There are so many other things I would have liked to have mentioned as well. I am aware of that. I just want you to know. How easy is it to travel independently in Russia? How good is your Russian? I really think that you need to have a basic understanding of Russian. Not everyone speaks English. Not all the signs are in English. It's definitely not a kind of bilingual experience. Is there anything worth seeing in the east of Russia? Bushwalking, hiking, quaint bridges. I mean, yeah, I was talking about Kamchatka, definitely. I mean, Kamchatka is an amazing destination, if you like, over in the far east of Russia. Active volcanoes, very, very, incredible national parks there, definitely. Is the train high-speed rail? I'm aware that the photo I showed of the Sapsan train looks like it's been derailed. I think it's just a clever suggestion of speed. 150 miles an hour, is that high speed? Is Russia handicap accessible? It's not great, I must say. I'd say I work in Italy a lot as well, and I wouldn't say Italy. They're both catching up. Is it safe to walk? Yes, absolutely. Without a tour group, I don't think you don't get the feeling that there's safety in numbers. What you do get on the organized tours of these places is a guide. And I think the guides are worth their weight in gold. They really, you'll miss so much without them. So if there is a kind of organized tour going on, do it, because you're having access to one of the local experts who are just great. Wasn't sure if this is covered. If visiting by cruise ship, yeah, you are allowed to visit for 24 hours. If you're on a cruise ship to St. Petersburg, you do not need a normal visa, which is a cost. So you get that for free. So you do get people coming in off the cruise ships to do, for example, a quick tour of St. Petersburg, followed by maybe the ballet in the evening. It's called the Peter and Paul Fortress because they were the founding fathers of the church, and Peter was the rock that the church was based on. Paul really kind of expanded the appeal of the church from the Jews to the Gentiles. But both of them very important in the Orthodox Russian church as well. Would we have a visa that allows us to explore independently in our free time? Yeah, absolutely. You are not, there's not the same degree of control. Are the diamonds of Russia for export only, or did local and get a chance to purchase and wear them? They do get the chance to purchase and wear them. How many days and nights in St. Petersburg? I would say, obviously this is an imaginary tour. I think 3 nights in St. Petersburg and 3 nights in Moscow just allows you a bit of free time. It allows you to do things that are interesting, maybe like leaving the city for an afternoon. And the suburbs are fantastic. When you drive through, you see how people lived. It's really a part of your experience. Are ballet tickets as costly in Russia as they are in the States? No, absolutely not. And you know, absolutely. There are, you know, we're very good at working with them. The guides in St. Petersburg and Moscow, it's difficult to get tickets for the Bolshoi, but the tickets in St. Petersburg are a lot easier. Of course, you need to guess how many tickets people are going to take. I mean, who's interested in the ballet, who's not? So that's an issue, and it helps if we know numbers ahead, but sometimes that's impossible. Why do the tops of the buildings look like drops? Yes, that's right. In the churches, they look like onions, don't they? Brightly coloured onions. That is architectural. It's a tradition, and they say it's also to collect prayers, as we have steeples that shoot up towards the sky, spires of churches. They have these kind of domes that collect the prayers and send them upwards. Just Comsomol youth didn't volunteer to build, right? They were forced to work there. Okay, I apologise for that. Yes, I think that's a valid comment. Okay, onion designs. How do people in Russia react when meeting American tourists? It's a lot different now. I had a lot of friends from the DDR when I was in Berlin, and the wall that separated the West from the East and that ran through Berlin was called the Wall Against Fascism. Amazing. So we see it as the Iron Curtain or whatever. It was called the Wall Against Fascism. So it was very different. People were educated. Yeah, definitely. Westerners were kind of like the enemy. But that's all changed now. When meeting American tourists, I think that there's curiosity. I wish I could. I had some photos of some wonderful tourists from Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and other places. Really, really interested in where we came from. You know, it's great. What is the cost of the Moscow-Vladivostok rail trip? I would pay about $85 for a ticket, and it depends when you buy them. The sooner you buy them, the better. But you don't need to worry. Part of you know, Mara's job and my job to help is to organise stuff like that. You shouldn't have to do that, but maybe you want to go on your own. Why not show the Holocaust Museum in the park? I think that's a good point. I went way over time anyway, so I think to include all these things, I may have lost you. Is the Metropole Hotel a place you could recommend one can stay? Oh yeah, it's wonderful. And yes, of course, a gentleman in Moscow. Please send us a contact. I'm happy to share that if Mara wants to do that. How historically accurate is the show The Americans? I can't answer that. I'm very sorry. Do the people of Russia display a patriotic disposition like the jingoistic Americans? Okay, not sure. Do you give the option of a side trip to Ekaterinburg? Well, that would be great. Certainly you can get a train there. And it's a fantastic place. It's also where the Romanovs were well, executed in the basement of the house where they were imprisoned. Best time to visit. Best time to visit. I have visited it at all times of the year. I live in Scotland, so weather is not an issue for me. If it was, I wouldn't live here. I would go at any time. Obviously, it snows quite heavily, although in this December, I went to both St. Petersburg and Moscow. There was no snow, and it was really confusing. So I don't know. I really, maybe Easter, Christmas, the great holidays. August is lovely in St. Petersburg and Moscow. You've got it's not so hot. It's a really nice climate, especially if you're busy. You don't feel the heat's not oppressive. It's a nice time of year. What scams should tourists beware of? Well, they're very organised. We've had people lose their wallets, and that within 5 minutes, someone's kind of emptied their credit card. So, crime is definitely organised. The sunglasses with the stop sign. Okay, I'm not sure what they were, actually. I'm definitely going to go back and look at it, though. Do you know Rasputin? Yes, Boney M. Fantastic song, historically inaccurate. How much time do you suggest? Is Murmansk worth the trip? Utterly. Yes, I haven't been there, but I've seen images of it and talked to people. How much time do you suggest as a minimum visit? I think the idea of doing a week is about spot on. You don't want to be rushing around thinking, oh no, I'm going to have to go back, Do women have the same rights as men in Russia? They are not paid the same. That is an issue. Do most Russians support Putin? That's the $1 million question, isn't it? Do they? Is it fixed? He wins landslide after landslide. He's been president ever since the year 2000, with an interim period of 4 years when he was prime minister. Can you find people that speak English? Yes, younger people. If you get a taxi with Yandex or something, generally they'll be interested in trying out their English. Non-Orthodox minorities, how they get by, like the Buddhist area of Russia. Very good points. I'll have to look at that. Were the communists afraid of the power of the church? They had a systematic program of destruction of the churches throughout the 1930s, but Sergiyev Possad was always allowed to exist as a monastery, and every communist leader, even Brezhnev and Khrushchev, visited Sergiyev Possad at some point, as an interesting point. The power of the church, I think that a lot of the breakaway Soviet Union countries like the DDR used church structures to organize politically, but not so much in Moscow. Best time, June, the White Nights. That's a fantastic idea. And things kind of stay open. It's very exciting. That's true. It really never gets dark for about 3 weeks. The internet's opened up the West, absolutely. Isn't it ironic that Mikhail I was ordained and Nicholas were murdered? Absolutely. Yeah, good point. Is the KGB still evident? Yeah, you can see there's a monumental building in Moscow called the Lubyanka, which is, it's terrifying. I mean, if you think about what went on there, you wouldn't want to visit the Lubyanka under the communists. Is Lenin's mausoleum worth a visit? It is. The lines are, you'll be lining up for 2 hours. There's other things to do in Moscow, and you're kind of ushered in very quickly after your long wait without a toilet break. Can we tip your sister for the kittens? Yes, that's lovely. I hope you enjoyed the kittens. What about nuclear waste in Russia? I don't know. I do know that when there was a nuclear explosion in Chernobyl, we were very aware of it in Berlin. Everyone stopped picking mushrooms in the forest, which was a great German thing to do, because they basically sucked in all the radiation from the air. I do remember that. How are the bathrooms? In China, they were horrible. The standard of accommodation in Russia is wonderful. It's absolutely stunning. Even what you would describe as, budget hotels, super space, well organized. They've really got that right. Why do Russians not smile as much as Americans? I think you might have a point. I can't answer that question. Have you ever been to the Church on the Blood in Ekaterinburg? No, I'd like to. Ruska, well, I'll have to check that out. Edward Rutherford. What's the cost of train from Seattle? About $85 if you're organised. My daughter speaks German fluent. Is there many citizens that speak German or English? If you go towards the west, you're more likely to encounter Yiddish speakers or German speakers. But German wouldn't necessarily be a second language now. English has become the second language. Do the subways have elevators? Yes, they do. Not all of them. And the escalators, even in St. Petersburg, actually, especially in St. Petersburg, because they're very deep because of the river, are very steep. So you stand at the top of these escalators and you look down and think, well, I wouldn't like to fall down that. Talk about the architecture, the top of the building specific. I think we did that. Do US citizens need visa? Yes, you do need a visa to visit. Are Westerners welcomed by the locals? Very much so. That's been my experience. You know, and I think learning a little bit of Russian, just to say kind of spasiba, thank you, or something, I think it's really important and people really appreciate that, if that's okay. Do they have on and off buses, hop on, hop off buses? Yes, they do. Do they take US dollars at most tourist sites and souvenir shops? Yes, that's an interesting question. They do. The exchange rate isn't very good. So if you can exchange it, if you can look for a better exchange rate, maybe at the airport, it's always useful. There is not a two-tier economy like Cuba, where I know for many years you could buy things at a certain price in dollars and things at a certain price in Cuban pesos. Can you tour the Bolshoi Ballet Academy? Yes, you can. Very difficult to get tickets for the performances. I haven't done the Trans-Siberian. I want to do it though. That is on my bucket list. Why is it named Russia? Because the Rus were the original inhabitants of Russia. Do you do tours of train stations? No, but we do kind of cross over to some of the train stations with the underground tour. Why is he called Peter the Great? Because he was responsible for kind of putting Russia on the map. He was very front-footed. He saw Russia as being great, and he did a lot about it. You know, virtually created the Baltic Navy, created this beautiful city out of nothing. You walk down the Nevsky Prospect, and you know that was a kind of a path through the trees when Peter had his idea. Credit cards accepted at most places, yes. Do you need a PIN to use a credit card? Do you need a PIN? Increasingly you do, but not always. Down memory lane, I learned new things too. Thank you, Amanda. Is the cost of housing affordable? It's become more expensive. People don't earn a lot of money still, especially not at the moment. Where's the best place to join the locals? Aha, or foods markets. A lot of locals, I think if you want to see the locals and enjoy food with them, lunch breaks are great. So all the cafeterias and self-service places in the busy areas like near Gom and the Nevsky Prospect, you'll see a lot of people coming in from work to eat, and they're great. Maybe you want to chat to them. Texas, how cold is it in the winter? It can get very cold. When I first went, I think it was about 8 years ago, I thought I was going to the North Pole. That is not the case. I think someone terrorized me by saying it was minus 40 degrees centigrade. Nonsense. Definitely cold, but for example, this winter, I hardly needed a jacket in Moscow. So very strange. So curious about the life expectancy difference between women and men. Me too. It's I don't know. I'm still curious about that. I can't answer that question though. Are bears still able to be seen? Yes, they are. Is there a Jewish museum in Moscow? Not that I'm aware of. Are there Jewish sections? Yes, around Rabat Street. Should you carry your passport on your person? No, I think a driving license, an identity card or something official is good enough. Passports, the hotels are very keen to keep your passport. So you'll check in and or maybe Mara helping, one of your leaders will collect the passports and give them to the hotel. So no, you don't need your passport with you because the hotels wouldn't do that to you. It kind of incapacitates you. And then they'll give them to you at the end of your stay or if you ask. that evening. You get a small immigration leaflet, a tiny little piece of paper, which immigration put in your passport. Do not lose that piece of paper. That's really important. It shows when you entered the country, it shows where you're staying and stuff. If you lose that, you'll lose your flight. You'll spend hours talking to the police. It's definitely not worth it. Is it a good journey for children, teens? It's amazing. Moscow is, I have a 5-year-old son, Benedict, and I'm dying to take him to Moscow. It's a fantastic place for children. We've got Hamleys in London. There's a superstore just after Lubyanka in Moscow, which has five floors of children's toy stores and children's themed cafes and stuff. There's the Jungle Book. There's a ballet that does the Jungle Book. There's a very famous theatre that does a cat theatre run by clowns. I mean, I can't think of a better place for kids. It's not necessarily like Italy, where they all coo over your children, but it is fantastic for kids. I would definitely take my kids there. Is there a big difference between the eastern and western parts of Russia? Yes, in population, and it's Asia. And you see everything changes. You feel very far away from home in the east. What is your guilty pleasure in St. Petersburg and Moscow? Something you do every visit? I really like music, and there's a fantastic record shop in St. Petersburg. I would go and try and talk to the people there, actually, and just find out what's happening. How big is the tourist industry in Russia? It is really big, I'm afraid, and so that's been a tough year. Does Russia have a lot of climate issues, hurricanes and such? No, but it depends where you are. I mean, if you're in Siberia, that is tough. You know, you would be sent to Siberia as a punishment. So there are areas of Russia which you can't cultivate. You can't grow anything. Okay, that's what we're talking about. That's how inhospitable it is. Oh, that's great. How much has Russia changed in 15 years? Enormously. Definitely worth a visit. I'd be interested to see what you think of it now. Are restaurants expensive? No, not the cafeterias. The self-service places are okay. There aren't that many great restaurants in St. Petersburg, but I've been to one. The last one I went to was called Birch, and it was kind of like almost like a Swedish restaurant, but not cheap. Definitely not cheap. So you know, who knows? What's the one item you recommend as a must-have to pack? Your toothbrush. What is the meaning of Moscow? I don't know. Are there Jewish sections in synagogues? There are Jewish sections. Does all of Russia speak a similar dialect? No, absolutely not. All right, here we go. There is a fantastic Jewish museum in Moscow. I apologize for that. The Jewish Museum. Thank you. I will definitely go there next time I am in Moscow. Thank you very much for that information. Can you hunt and fish there? Do you need to buy licenses or permits? Good question. I don't know. I would imagine if you're using firearms, yes, you would. Do you speak Russian? I did Russian at school. I was an unusual child. I think I was the only person from my school to volunteer. I successfully passed the exam, and I speak enough Russian to kind of order taxis and argue with people primitively. My Russian isn't great. It's not conversational, but I get by and I make the effort. Are there vegan options in the restaurants? There are, absolutely. Is there a sleepover train from Moscow to St. Petersburg? Good question, I don't know. Yeah, alcohol and suicide, that is really sad, as Russia is so incredibly beautiful. Okay, there's some fascinating questions. All right, thank you.
115 questions Dominic got through today. That was incredible. So I always love the Q&A section of the tours because you learn so many different little nuances that you really don't necessarily get through the educational aspect of the history and the culture. So thank you very much for taking your time to go through that. And everybody out there, thank you for staying with us. We still have quite a bit of people online. I'm putting up a slide right now of the future virtual tours that we have lined up and the website that you can go to, but you will also get a link in the thank you email so that you can just click on it and go directly there. Again, thank you, Dominic. You did a wonderful job, and we really appreciate your time, your energy, and your passion for Russia and all of its culture and history. And for everybody else out there, if it's morning, afternoon, or evening, have a good rest of your day, and we will see you. I'm going to end this tour at this point. So have a good time.
Thank you very much, Mara. Thank you, everyone. Okay. До свидания.